everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Michelle the Bookworm, and today I wanted to take some time to go over my book stats for 2020 because I feel like this year was so crazy. I feel like my what I wanted to read this year was just all over the place, and I definitely branched out a lot this year, and I'm really excited for that. This year I did a lot of reading, but I also did a lot of other projects. So the types of books that I was reading kind of went along with that. In total, I read 29 books, which isn't too bad. It wasn't my goal. My goal was to read 3 books a month, which would have been 26, but that's okay. I mean, honestly, 2020 didn't go as anyone planned, so I'm okay with 29. In total, the total number of pages that I read this year was 10,582 pages, which is quite a bit. The shortest book that I read this year was Henrietta and Eleanor, a contemporary retelling of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For some reason, it was an extremely lengthy book. It was a couple of hours, but on Goodreads it says that it was only 3 pages. So I'm going to go with Goodreads and say that my shortest book this year was that audiobook because it says it was only 3 pages long. And the longest book that I read this year, I listened to as an audiobook as well, and that was The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, and that was 1,312 pages long. Kind of crazy, but it's not surprising. That book took a really long time for me to get through. The average length of the books that I had was about 364 pages. So, and which sounds about right. I tend to read a little bit chunkier books. The most popular book that I read this year, which I guess this is part of the my Goodreads stats, so other people had this on their bookshelves as well, was The Girl on the Train. It looks like roughly 3 million other people read that book as well. So that was pretty interesting. So I'm not surprised that it was on that book was actually on my 100 Essential Books to Read in Your Lifetime. I'm not even sure where I got it. I think I got it like at a book sale where all these books were like $1, and I was like, hey, I recognize this book title. So I picked it out. The least popular book that I read, only 962 people had, I guess, shelved it on Goodreads, and that was Twisted Romance, and that was a pretty good book. It was a a collection of contemporary romance pieces, which I thought was really sweet. I read that back in February, and I really enjoyed it. My average rating, which I'm actually pretty happy about, this seems about right, is 3.7, which means that actually my ratings have gone up. I know last year I think my average rating was like in the 2s, so not too great. But hey, this year seemed to be like a very solid year for me, which I'm very happy about. Now, in terms of genres, as I mentioned before, when I first started doing BookTube, I was really into classic literature. I was really into magic and that kind of thing. And over the course of me being on BookTube, I feel like I've actually expanded my horizons a little bit. So the top 3 genres that I had for this year, all of these had 6 books in them. So my One of them is romance, which I'm very surprised about. I don't normally gravitate towards romance, but I think that a lot of the books that I ended up reading had an element of romance in it. I had 6 fantasy books, which actually makes sense. Fantasy is the one that I generally gravitate towards. And I had 6 fiction books, which makes sense as well. So I think it's really interesting that still, even after last year, like I'm still gravitating towards romancy type books, which I don't know, I guess maybe that's a genre that I just like now. It's really interesting to see how I'm still like that's still something that I'm really, really invested in. And as for the bottom 3, as I mentioned before, I read a wide range of genres, and these were all the ones that only had like one. I've only read one of these books. The list is children's fiction, satire, a play. I read a drama. I read a nonfiction book. I read a book on magical realism. I read a book on surrealism. I read a book on popular science. I read a book on high fiction. I read a book on paranormal, which I want to read more of. That was a really good book. I remember that book, and I want to read more of that. I read one novel, one postmodern book, and one book that was a natural disaster. So that was really interesting to see all the ones that, like, just the wide range of books that I kind of dabbled in throughout this year. So it took me a minute to go through all of my books. I actually had quite a few 5-star books this year, and I'm really, really happy about that. So I had to go through all my 5-star books and really whittle down which ones I really, really thought meant the most to me. And in 3rd place was Dracula. Actually, I really, really enjoyed listening to Dracula this year. It was so, like, it was a mystery, but it was macabre. It was also really corny, and to be honest. And that's because a lot, this book at the time was revolutionary. And so all of these, like, concepts now that you think of, oh, this guy's a vampire, it wasn't a thing back then. And so it was honestly during these times when they were like, oh, this guy is like always hanging around, and oh, he gets here so fast, and oh, his skin's so white. It's just so funny how obvious it is in this story that this guy is a vampire, but nobody's catching on to it, and it's just like this big old mystery, but you know the ending. It was a really and that, I think that added like a certain sort of like humor to the book that probably wasn't necessarily supposed to be there, but it was also really, really, really suspenseful, and there was a lot of mystery to it, and there was some romance, and so I think that that Dracula had like a little bit of everything. My number 2 book of this year was The Green Mile by Stephen King. I could not put this book down. I was reading this book while I was moving even. This book was so good. I just loved the different perspectives that it had and just the different mystical aspects, and I loved the magical realism, and I love it. Honestly, I love anything that has to do with psychics, and it was also King. So I really love Stephen King books because he brings this element of just rawness, just this raw aspect of people. And it also really talked a lot about like what it means to die, and what it means to move on, and like death isn't necessarily like a punishment, it's like also a time of just being at peace and just being at rest. So I think that that was another really cool aspect of it. If you want to go ahead and check out my review on it, I went ahead and did a review. I'll go ahead and link that down below. And I can talk a little bit, you can hear me go a little bit more into detail about it. But The Green Mile it's definitely a really good book, and I would highly recommend it. And the number one book for this year was The Girl on the Train. So this book was, this was a book that I just picked up because I had recognized it from my 100 Essential Books to Read poster. And honestly, I love that poster, but it's also been a hit and a miss. This book hit dead on. This book, like, was about this girl who, like, is going through a really bad divorce, and she's an alcoholic, and she, like, builds this fantasy world about this other woman, and, like, fantasizes about what it'd be like to be this woman, and then this woman goes missing, and she's just, like, completely obsessed with this other woman and where she went and what happened to her. So it was really, really interesting, and so I loved I really loved just the mystery of it. I loved, like, thinking, okay, is she, like, really crazy? Is she just depressed? Is she just being, like, an alcoholic? Or does she really have something here? And, like, for a moment you don't know, and then finally you're just, like, with her and going, okay, something's going on. Like, we got to get to the bottom of this. And, like, this mystery ends up saving her. It really ends up saving her life in the end. And I would highly, if you are into thrillers at all, I would highly recommend this book. It was a really quick and easy read. I read it for the readathon this year. And I read it I believe I read it in a day. Or no, I read it in 2 days. So I would highly recommend this book. So while I've read a lot of really great books this year, there are some books that didn't quite meet the mark. On the bright side, I didn't have any 1-star books. So that's something that I thought was really, really cool this year, is that all 3 of these books are 2 stars. They had just enough entertainment for me to finish them. I finished all 3 of these books. So if I can't finish a book, that automatically means I give it 1 star. But if I finish the book, that means that there's something that kept me going, even though that something wasn't very good. My third least favorite book, the third book, was Lord of the Rings by Harvard Lampoon. It was good. I did give it 2 stars. It was good for someone who has read The Lord of the Rings, and it was good for someone who read The Lord of the Rings. It was funny. It was a pretty quick read, but honestly, it didn't quite follow. It was just a little too wacky for me, and it was really perverse, and it definitely didn't follow the storyline at all. It kind of followed some of the elements. I think I would have liked it a little bit more if it followed the elements a bit more, but it was okay. It was an okay read. I would recommend it to any Lord of the Rings fan who just want to have a good laugh, but honestly, I read it once. It's probably not something I would read again. The second to the least favorite book of this year was The Life and Adventures of Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. I did not like this book. I was a huge fan of Swiss Family Robinson, and this book predates Swiss Family Robinson. Actually, Swiss Family Robinson is based off of the life and adventures of Robinson Crusoe. I honestly love the idea of being shipwrecked on an island and using everything you can to make a life for yourself. I think that that's something that's really cool, and honestly, it's something that I've always kind of like wondered if I could do. And honestly, I liked that aspect of it, and I really enjoyed listening to how he made certain things. But I honestly feel like he was really racist. He was really racist. Treated the native people like shit. And it was just way too religious for my taste. Way too religious. It was talking a lot about God. I understand that this is a book for the time. I do. I understand that. But it was just a lot. To the point where I would like skip past it. And so that's one of the reasons why it's kind of on my, and the fact that he treated other people like crap. I don't like that. I don't like him as a person. And I don't like him as a person. I don't like Robinson Crusoe as a person. And I think that that's why I didn't like this book so much, is because I didn't like the main character. All right. And my least favorite book for this year, I don't know why I didn't give it a 1. It also received a 2. And that was The Magic of You by Joanna Lindsey. This is a romance novel that I read back in February when I read nothing but romance novels. And it was bad. It was about this, like, 16-year-old girl who was supposed to get married to some guy, and she had her heart set on this 30-year-old pirate, or 40-year-old pirate. He was like 35 or something. He was older. And she's just throwing herself at this guy. She's just throwing herself at him, and he is acting like a number one a-hole. And like then she goes off, and then she goes and gets kidnapped. He has to save her, and this just keeps happening. Like she just keeps finding herself getting kidnapped, and I'm not for that. I'm not for being the damsel in distress type of situation. I think he kind of pulled his head out of his butt and became a little romantic. Plus there was like a really steamy like romance time. The ending kind of saved it. The ending was good. And that's the only reason I didn't give it a 1, is that the ending was good. But everything up until like the last couple of 100 pages was absolutely crap. So don't read this book. Don't read this book. I mean, you know what's going to happen in the end. This book was obviously made because it was an end. It was part of a story that continued on, and these are obviously side characters. It's a side character story, and it wasn't done very well. Anyway, so that's what I've got for you this year. My number 1 favorite book for this year was Girl on the Train, and my least favorite book was The Magic of You. So that's it. That's what my book stats for the year 2020 were, and it was really surprising, and I honestly had a great time reading all these books. What kind of books did you read for 2020? Did you read any specific genre this year? Was there one book that you read that like you were going to remember for years to come, whether it was good or bad? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you very soon. All right. Good luck, everybody. Hang in there, and when you have a moment, pick up a good book. It'll do you wonders. All right. Bye, bookworms. See you soon.